What's up, Raiders fans everywhere? This is WiFiWillie of the Raiders Rundown, and we are going to do a full depth chart review of the Raiders, a full roster breakdown after the draft, after the UDFA undrafted free agent signings. Who do we have on this roster? What is the 2022 roster? Who could make the final 53-man roster? And how much are we paying for each of these players? These are all the questions that we're going to talk about and that you're going to discover throughout this video. Let's first start off with the running back position because that's the most controversial position. What the hell is going on? Josh Jacobs, is he the future at running back for the Las Vegas Raiders? $3.7 million this year. Kenyon Drake is at 3.8. You see, Drake is making the most amount of money. And keep in mind, Drake had his contract restructured, so he is fully guaranteed this year he will remain on the team. I know he's battling through some injuries, and some people say because of his injuries, that's why we grabbed Zamir White. That is a possibility. At the same time, I don't think we're going to cut Kenyon Drake at any point because literally we financially will lose money if we do so. Brandon Bolden is the veteran, 10-year vet who's going to teach the system to the rest of the players, and it is really a loaded running back room. We know Jakob Johnson is probably going to start and beat out Sutton Smith, and we're only going to keep one fullback here. However, Britton Brown and Zamir White, will these guys make the final 53-man roster? After looking at the tape, watching more of Britton Brown, looking at Zamir White especially, you know these guys are talented enough to make a 53-man roster. I don't think if you put any of these guys on the practice squad, especially Zamir White, it's not even a question. He's not going on the practice squad. But Britton Brown, if he does go on the practice squad, he's going to get plucked by somebody. I really do believe he's going to be plucked. You have to think, what are the Raiders going to do? Probably keep 4 running backs on the 53-man roster. Who are the 4 going to be? I'm not sure, but I think Josh Jacobs, you can't trade the guy until after June 1st because you'll lose money if you trade him before June 1st. So if that happens, it'll be after June 1st. My personal opinion, I think we're going to maneuver the roster in a way to have a lot of running backs. I personally think Josh Jacobs is going to play out his contract. Whatever value you'd get in terms of draft capital this year for Josh Jacobs after June 1st will not be worth his production. You'd much rather have him play out his contract at $3.7 million this year. Let him test free agency next year. You're going to get so much value out of him, especially with the running back position that takes a beating all the time. You're going to get a lot of value if you just let this guy play rather than trading him for what? A 3rd or a 4th round pick, maybe a 2nd. I mean, a 2nd is pretty steep. I don't see another team doing that for a running back. So essentially the value is not great enough for a trade. And that's why I think maybe we'll roll with 4 or 5 running backs. Who knows? I'm anticipating 4. And it's going to be very interesting to see. Can Britton Brown really make this 53-man roster? It's going to be a hot and heavy preseason, so I cannot wait to check that out August 1st. Now, I wanted to start off and talk about the interior defensive line as well because, look, that's where we had the most additions, and you can see this thing is loaded and packed to the brim. Look at all these players. Now, let's keep in mind, Vernon Butler Jr., this player that we picked up just this year from free agency, is a former first-round pick, so he is not going to go away quietly, and he's going to fight for his roster spot, and it's not just a given that Matthew Butler and Neil Farrell Jr. will make the final 53, will beat out somebody like Vernon Butler who's going to be hungry. We spent some big money at Bilal Nichols up top for defensive tackle, so you know he's obviously going to stay. Andrew Billings, Kyle Pecco, Kendall Vickers, will these guys make the 53? I'm not sure. There's going to be intense competition, and I think the addition of Neil Farrell Jr. and Matthew Butler does lower these guys' stock, does push them out a little bit. Myron Tagovailoa, I did a breakdown of all the UDFAs. That's steep if this guy makes this 53-man roster, but I will say, man, do we have a ton of competition here. We have a lot of veterans too with Jonathan Hankins, Vernon Butler, and Bilal Nichols. And then we also have just young up-and-coming guys who are draft picks, people who are 25 years and up trying to make a splash. And there's an array of different styles here. You got obviously your nose tackle with Neil Farrell Jr. and then Kyle Pecco, and then your 3 techs with these other players. So I think this is a lot of depth. This makes me happy because even if some of these guys do go to the practice squad, I don't anticipate that they'll all be plugged. And it seems like we're going to have a heavy rotation of defensive tackles playing multiple different roles for us. Let me know who you think is going to make it out of here. Matthew Butler, I will say, watching his tape, this guy's impressive, and I am rooting for him to play a significant role this year. Now, I wanted to talk about centers because a lot of people are assuming that Dylan Parham is going to be a guard because that's what he recently played in college. However, at the Senior Bowl, he did play a lot of center. And then he had Jason Kelsey, the Eagles center, talk about how Parham has the skills to be a great center in the NFL eventually. He had that keyword in there, eventually. So we'll see what happens there. Andre James is on the last year of his contract. I will say he's $1.5 million against the cap. However, he has $3.5 million in dead money. So I don't think we're going to move on from Andre James at any point this year. But the Raiders are going to have to make a decision on this guy next year. His contract's going to expire. So I think this gives him a lot of flexibility. Training Dylan Parham at center. And Dave Ziegler said at a recent press conference that the centers and guards are trained in the same way and they're pretty much interchangeable. So these guys are also essentially competing at guard. So we're going to have the best man available for the 5 men with the offensive line, and James and Dylan Parham are going to be competing with the likes of Good, with the likes of Simpson, because that's the way our scheme rolls. But I do anticipate the Raiders are going to try to work Parham in at center, and perhaps we'll see him take over next year. Now let's get into guard. I'm not sure where Leatherwood's going to play. People say he's going to play guard. However, we do not have that many tackles on the roster, which you'll see in a little bit. People have talked about how maybe Jermaine Illuminor could perhaps slide out to tackle and create some more competition there. We'll see. Projected starters here right now are Denzel Good, and Alex Barr, shockingly, is a new addition on the team and is commanding a decent amount of money compared to these other players, so maybe he is in line to possibly start at guard. But if I had to predict right now, I would go with Denzel Good and Illuminor at guard, or maybe Leatherwood instead of Illuminor at guard. Now, offensive tackle, we're talking about this. It's very thin. We spent a 7th round pick on Thayer Munford. You can't really assume a 7th round pick is going to make the 53-man roster. A lot of people said Munford was already underrated going into the draft, and a lot of people said Thayer Munford was underrated going into the draft, but he still did fall, and he did fall for a reason. I think he's a versatile guy. Maybe he'll make an impact wherever there's a need, but you can't just sit here and say he's going to make the 53-man roster as a tackle, especially with being a 7th round pick. Brandon Parker was just re-signed for decent money. Alex Leatherwood's a former 1st round pick, and we already have Colton Miller, so we know Colton Miller starting. The question is who's starting on the right side. Parker beat out Leatherwood last year with Greg Olson's offense. Who knows if he'll do it again this year? And maybe, like we said earlier, Illuminor could go and switch over and compete at tackle. We know he played tackle in 2020 with the Patriots while Josh McDaniels was there. But the low-key sleeper undrafted free agent, Olaseni, this guy who's like, what, 6'9", 350 pounds. He's like bigger than Trent Brown. Hey, if this guy can be a steal at 26 years old as an undrafted free agent work out for us, you got to celebrate that. So we'll see what happens with Olaseni. Now with wide receivers, we know who our starters are. We got Devontae Adams, we got Hunter Renfrow, Edwards and Robinson are going to compete for that extra outside starting wide receiver spot, and maybe Mac Hollins will compete as well because he's making $2 million this year, and you know he's not going to go away quietly. Tyron Johnson, the speedster, is still here, but there's tough competition in this wide receiver room. Stoner's still here, DJ Turner's still here. We just got Justin Hall and Trey Turner, the undrafted free agents. I will say, out of all these men here, Tyron Johnson has the best straight line speed. Justin Hall and DJ Turner are pretty shifty, and they have great quickness, but they still don't have that straight speed that Tyron Johnson has. This will be an interesting competition. We got these 5 wide receivers here. Who's going to maybe get that 6th wide receiver spot or that key practice squad spot where you're going in and out of the 53-man roster just so we can save you? We know that happens often, especially if someone goes down. Either way, let me know who you think's going to make it. I really like Justin Hall, though. I think he really popped to me on the screen. I'm excited to see what he does in preseason. And if I had to make a prediction right now, these top 5 people on the list, they're going to be on the 53-man roster. Tyron Johnson probably is going to float in and out of practice squad and the 53, like I said earlier. But I like the fact that we got competition in 2 areas. Competition between Edwards, Robinson, and Hollins for a serious starting role, and then also competition just to make this roster with the bottom 5 players on the screen here. Now, safeties, we are just overloaded with safeties. Dallin Levitt, one of the richest safeties on the team with $2.4 million, and Jonathan Abram, we'll see if he gets traded after June 1st. That's when you'll save some money by moving on from him, and it seems like a possibility when you got Duran Harmon in the mix, you're paying Levitt, you got Gillespie from last year, Roderick Teamer is still re-signed on this roster, and he ended up playing at the latter half of the season after Jonathan Abram got injured. And then Polamalu, related to Troy Polamalu, he's going to compete as well. Quintero Cole, Bryce Cosby, I would be surprised if they make the 53-man roster. No disrespect, but from what I've read, doesn't seem likely. But who knows? Things happen in the NFL, and coaching staffs have their own evaluations on what players they value. But I do like the fact that we have 3, 6, 9 players competing at safety. Most of the time, you only keep 5 safeties on the roster. So there's going to be a lot of cuts made. But I think all these guys are going to get an opportunity. If I had to make some predictions today, I would say it's just the top 5 on this roster who make it. Merring, Abram, Gillespie, Harmon, and Levitt. Maybe a surprise trade. Maybe you surprisingly trade away Abram, and then somebody like Teamer or Polamalu makes the roster instead, and Duran Harmon ends up being a starter for the Raiders at strong safety. That's all a possibility. Now, cornerback is pretty weird because there's a lot of competition just for starters and every asset in the cornerback room. Really, Nate Hobbs excelled last year and was one of the best rookie cornerbacks in the NFL. However, that was in Gus Bradley's scheme in the cover 3, where he was pretty much just running zone cover 3 the whole time. I don't anticipate that he's going to do that in Patrick Graham's scheme, and we'll see if he's still the slot corner in this scheme that he was last year. Either way, outside cornerback, who knows who's going to start? Trayvon Mullen has battled with injuries. He's on his last year. Same with Rocky Sin last year on his deal. Anthony Averett's on a 1-year deal, but it was signed to a handsome amount, $3.9 million. Darius Phillips was the first free agent that we signed this year, $1.4 million. Amik Robertson is still there competing, and Crevan LeBlanc was just signed this year as well. Sam Webb, the undrafted free agent, is competing as well. You know, typically you keep 5 cornerbacks. Amik Robertson did stay on the roster last year. Maybe he's able to beat out Darius Phillips and LeBlanc and stay on this roster. But these other guys at the top of the list are clearly going to be on the 53-man roster. The question is, who's going to start? You know, just because this new coaching staff wants to bring in their guys, I really wouldn't be surprised if we saw Anthony Averett rock us in on the outside and Nate Hobbs in the slot. Or maybe you switch out Mullen for Averett. Maybe he beats him out. But either way, I'm going to be very excited to watch this all through camp and all through preseason. Really, this is the biggest position battle for starters. This is the biggest position battle for starters on the whole entire roster. And you got to be locked in and pay attention to this year. Edge defender, I just love this group because we have so much depth. Cleveland Farrell can be traded after June 1st, and we would save a lot of cap because he's almost $10 million this year. He counts more towards the cap than Chandler Jones and Max Crosby separately, which is absolutely ridiculous, but that's what happens when you get picked 4th overall. However, I don't know how much value you'll get by trading away Farrell, and this reminds me of a Josh Jacobs situation too, where I just think it's worth it to keep him on the roster rather than trade him away. Let him test free agency next year. You're not going to get much value for him. He is more valuable as a backup than as a draft pick. Unless this coaching staff thinks that he is so bad that he can't even back up Crosby or Chandler Jones, yes, then move on from him. But if he's the same Cleveland Farrell that Gus Bradley and Paul Gunther dealt with, you know he can still rotate in. You know he could still sub in case someone goes down. And who better than Cleveland Farrell to do that for you? I think he allows us to have amazing depth at the edge position. So I really do hope we keep Cleveland Farrell on this 53-man roster. Be on the lookout for Tashawn Bauer to make this 53-man roster as well, since he has a relationship with the Patriots and Ziegler and McDaniels. Now, linebacker, I don't think we have much top-heavy competition here. We know who our starters are. Jayon Brown, I think, will play at least in a base defense. Divine Diablo and Perryman will as well. The question is, who is going to be the sub linebackers? Who is going to be there in that nickel, in that 3-3-5, right? Which players are we going to choose? We know Patrick Graham sometimes slides a safety in for that 3-3-5 defense, and so you're only going to have 2 real linebackers there in that situation. I think it's going to be an intense battle between Divine Diablo and Jayon Brown for that sub linebacker position. I think we need to quit sleeping on Denzel Perryman. He was a Pro Bowler last year. He will start in the sub defense and in the base defense, guys. Tyler Fackrell, I have him here at linebacker, but I anticipate that he's going to be more of an edge defender in the sub defense, perhaps maybe backing up somebody like Chandler Jones. I don't think we're going to use him as a true linebacker. Keep in mind, he had several sacks, double-digit sacks when he was there with Green Bay. Mika Kaiser will be our thumper linebacker, and then we got Darian Butler, who we just got as a UDFA. Needs to work on the technique, but has great coverage skills, so he can really compete to maybe squeeze in and make this 53-man roster as a backup. Quarterback's not that interesting. I think we got a decent backup in Nick Mullins. This is decent depth, but you don't have a young up-and-coming quarterback who you're excited about. Nick Mullins has bounced around from teams for a reason. However, I will admit he did whoop the Raiders' ass, and that memory will always stick with me. Let's see what happens with Chase Garbers here, though. I think this guy is very interesting out of UC Berkeley. Speedier, dual threat quarterback. Maybe Josh McDaniels can groom this guy and turn him into something special in a few years. And maybe he can squeeze out competition like Garrett Gilbert. I highly doubt he beats out somebody like Nick Mullins, though. Tight ends, we know who our starters are. We know we got Moreau and Waller, and Waller's here to stay since he's hanging out with Derek Carr at the beginning of the draft with Roger Goodell. The question will be, who gets this 3rd spot? Will it be Bowers or Hollister? Fotheringham, I think, stays on the practice squad, and I don't think he gets plucked, and I think he'll be a great blocker for us down the road. Hollister was brought in by the new regime. Bowers was here last year, so we'll see if that has an impact on who gets this 3rd tight end spot. Well, hey, I hope you enjoyed that full roster breakdown. I just wanted to go through every single position and get it down on paper for you guys. Now that we got these new draft picks, now that we got these new UDFAs on our roster, we had to look at what we got. So let me know if you enjoyed this video. Give me a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the Raiders Rundown with WiFiWillie to get more Raiders content every freaking day. Let me know in the comments if I should shave immediately or should I grow it out. My name is WiFiWillie. Peace out, and I hope to see you Tuesday when we're going live at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern. Have a good one.